the scientific experiment that trapped humans inside a miniature Earth. For billions of years, Earth has quietly performed a miracle. Every breath you take depends on it. Every drop of water you drink depends on it. Every plant, animal, ocean, forest, and cloud is connected through an unimaginably complex system. Most people never think about it. The air seems endless. Food appears in stores. Water flows from a faucet. Life feels automatic. But what if humanity had to start over? What if scientists attempted to build a completely new Earth from scratch? Not a city, not a laboratory, an entire living world. A place with its own atmosphere, its own forests, its own weather, its own food supply. A world where humans could survive without any help from the outside. In the late 20th century, a group of scientists, engineers, ecologists, and visionaries decided to do exactly that. Their goals sounded almost impossible. They wanted to create a self-contained ecosystem that could support human life for years. Everything needed to exist inside a sealed structure. The air, the water, the soil, the plants, the animals, and the people. Nothing could enter. Nothing could leave. If successful, the experiment could change the future of humanity forever. It could prove that people might one day live on Mars. It could show that entire colonies could survive in space. It could reveal how life itself functions on a planetary scale. The project became known as Biosphere 2. The name was chosen for a simple reason. Earth itself was Biosphere 1. This new creation would become humanity's second attempt at building a living world. Construction began in the Arizona desert. The location seemed strange. Outside, temperatures could become brutal. The landscape was dry and unforgiving. Yet rising from the desert floor was one of the most ambitious scientific structures ever built. Massive glass panels reflected the sunlight. Steel frameworks stretched across enormous enclosed habitats. From above, the facility looked less like a building and more like an alien colony. Inside, engineers created entire ecosystems. A rainforest filled with tropical plants, a desert environment, a savanna, a marshland, agricultural fields, and even an artificial ocean containing living coral. Thousands of species were introduced. Every plant had a purpose. Every insect played a role. Every animal contributed to the balance. The idea was simple. Nature would take care of itself, just as it always had. But there was a problem. Nature is far more complicated than people realize. Scientists can study forests. They can study oceans. They can study animals. But recreating an entire world is something very different. Earth had spent billions of years evolving into a stable system. Biosphere 2 would have only a few years. Still, optimism remained high. The project attracted worldwide attention. Television crews documented construction. Newspapers called it one of the boldest scientific experiments ever attempted. Many people believed they were witnessing the first step toward humanity's future among the stars. Then came the final challenge. People had to move inside. 8 individuals were selected. Together, they would become the inhabitants of this artificial world. For 2 years, they would live completely separated from the outside environment. No fresh air, no deliveries, no restaurants, no grocery stores, no escape from the ecosystem they had created. When the day finally arrived, cameras recorded every moment. Friends and family gathered outside. Scientists watched carefully. The crew entered the structure. Large doors slowly closed behind them. The seals locked into place. And for the first time in human history, a group of people attempted to live inside a completely enclosed world. At first, everything seemed perfect. The rainforest flourished. Crops grew steadily. The atmosphere remained stable. Animals adapted to their surroundings. The crew settled into daily routines. Each morning they checked equipment. They monitored environmental systems. They cared for crops and animals. They recorded data that scientists hoped would transform humanity's understanding of life itself. For a brief moment, it appeared the experiment might actually succeed. But hidden beneath the surface, something unexpected had already begun. The ecosystem was changing. Tiny imbalances were spreading through the structure. Invisible forces were quietly altering the atmosphere. The people inside had no idea. The scientists outside could not yet see the full picture, and before long, the most ambitious ecological experiment in history would become a lesson in just how fragile life can be. The first signs were almost impossible to notice. Nothing dramatic happened. No alarm sounded. No equipment failed. No one woke up one morning to discover a catastrophe. Instead, the problems arrived quietly, one small change at a time. The crew continued their daily routines. Every day began before sunrise. There was always work to do. The artificial world demanded constant attention. Crops needed care. Water systems required monitoring. Equipment had to be inspected. Data had to be recorded. Unlike life outside the structure, there was no room for neglect. A small problem ignored today could become a disaster tomorrow. At first, the agricultural systems appeared successful. Rows of sweet potatoes stretched across the growing areas. Beans climbed carefully designed supports. Rice fields produced healthy shoots. Peanut plants developed steadily. The crew spent countless hours farming. Much of their survival depended on those harvests. The plan had always been simple: grow enough food to sustain everyone inside. If the crops succeeded, the experiment could continue indefinitely. If they failed, everything else would become meaningless. Early harvests created optimism. The numbers looked encouraging. Scientists outside celebrated the progress. Newspapers published photographs of smiling crew members standing among green fields. To the public, Biosphere 2 looked like a triumph. Few people realized how much effort was required to maintain that appearance. Life inside the structure was exhausting. The crew worked long hours every day. There were no weekends, no vacations, no opportunity to step away from the experiment. Every person carried multiple responsibilities. A scientist might spend the morning collecting ecological data and the afternoon planting crops. An engineer might repair equipment before helping with food production. Everyone worked constantly. As weeks turned into months, subtle changes began affecting the ecosystem. Some species thrived unexpectedly. Others struggled. Certain insects multiplied at astonishing rates. Without natural population controls, their numbers exploded. Ants appeared everywhere. Cockroaches became increasingly common. Meanwhile, several species that scientists expected to flourish began disappearing. The balance of nature was shifting. One of the first warning signs involved pollination. Outside, countless insects performed this task automatically. Bees, butterflies, and other pollinators moved pollen from flower to flower without human assistance. Inside Biosphere 2, some pollinator populations declined. The consequences were immediate. Crew members often had to pollinate plants by hand. The process was slow and repetitive. Yet without it, important crops would fail. Every hour spent performing tasks normally handled by nature reminded the crew of an uncomfortable truth. Creating an ecosystem was far more difficult than anyone had imagined. Then another problem emerged. The food supply was smaller than expected, not dramatically smaller, at least not at first. But harvest after harvest produced slightly less food than calculations predicted. The differences accumulated. Scientists had carefully estimated how many calories the crew would need. Reality proved different. Daily labor inside the structure consumed enormous amounts of energy. People burned more calories than expected. The crops produced fewer calories than expected. Together, those two factors created a growing deficit. Meals gradually became smaller. The crew adapted. They reduced portions. They became efficient with every available resource. Nothing was wasted. Every piece of food mattered. Yet despite their efforts, many participants began losing weight. At first, the changes seemed insignificant. A few kilograms. Nothing alarming. But the losses continued month after month. Faces became thinner. Clothing became loose. The reality of constant hunger slowly became part of everyday life. Some crew members later described food as their most frequent thought. They dreamed about meals. They discussed recipes. They imagined restaurants. The simple act of eating became one of the most important events of each day. Outside the structure, reporters focused on technological achievements. Inside, survival was becoming increasingly difficult. Then came the mystery. that would eventually define the entire experiment. The atmosphere was changing. Sensors began detecting a gradual decline in oxygen levels. Initially, the numbers caused little concern. Minor fluctuations were expected. Natural ecosystems constantly experience variation. Scientists assumed the system would stabilize. Instead, oxygen levels continued falling, month after month. The decline was slow enough to avoid immediate panic, yet it was relentless. Crew members noticed unusual fatigue. Tasks that once felt routine became more demanding. Physical work required greater effort. Some individuals found themselves breathing harder after climbing stairs. Others struggled to maintain concentration. Nobody understood the cause. The rainforest still looked healthy. Plants continued growing. Nothing suggested an oxygen crisis. Yet the measurements could not be ignored. The atmosphere inside Biosphere 2 was changing in ways nobody had predicted. Outside experts examined the data. Theories emerged. Perhaps instruments were malfunctioning. Perhaps measurements were being misinterpreted. Perhaps some unknown factor was affecting the readings. But as additional evidence accumulated, one fact became impossible to deny. The oxygen was disappearing, and no one knew where it was going. The mystery puzzled some of the world's leading scientists. Every ecosystem contains countless interactions. Plants produce oxygen. Animals consume it. Microorganisms participate in complex chemical cycles. The challenge was identifying which part of the system was responsible. Weeks of investigation produced few answers. Meanwhile, oxygen levels continued falling. The crew felt the effects more strongly with each passing month. Some described symptoms similar to living at high altitude. Others experienced persistent fatigue. Physical performance declined. Simple tasks became increasingly difficult. For the people inside Biosphere 2, the experiment was no longer simply a scientific mission. It was becoming a test of endurance. And the most surprising discovery was still waiting to be found. Hidden beneath the soil, invisible to everyone, billions of microscopic organisms were playing a role that nobody had fully anticipated. Those tiny organisms would soon reveal a flaw in the experiment's design, a flaw significant enough to threaten the future of the entire project. The investigation intensified. Scientists inside and outside Biosphere 2 examined every possible explanation. The oxygen decline had become impossible to ignore. What made the situation so troubling was that the ecosystem appeared healthy. The rainforest was still green. The agricultural fields were still producing food. The trees continued growing. From a distance, the artificial world looked alive and stable. Yet the atmosphere told a different story. Every measurement revealed the same trend. Oxygen was disappearing. The question was simple. Where was it going? For months, researchers analyzed data from every corner of the structure. They monitored plants. They studied animal populations. They measured carbon dioxide levels. They tracked chemical changes in soil and water. Gradually, a surprising answer began to emerge. The problem was not one large mistake. It was hundreds of tiny processes working together. The first culprit was hidden underground. The rich soil inside Biosphere 2 contained enormous numbers of microorganisms. Bacteria and fungi were breaking down organic material exactly as they would in nature. The problem was that they were doing it more aggressively than expected. As they decomposed dead plant matter, they consumed oxygen. On a small scale, this was normal. On the scale of an entire sealed world, it became significant, but that alone did not explain everything. Another discovery shocked the engineers. The concrete used throughout the structure was also affecting the atmosphere. Chemical reactions inside the concrete absorbed carbon dioxide. This altered the balance of gases in unexpected ways. The ecosystem had become a giant chemistry experiment. Every component interacted with every other component. Changing one variable affected dozens more. The lesson was becoming clear. Nature was far more complicated than anyone had imagined. Earth performs countless invisible processes every second. Most people never notice them. But inside a sealed environment, every hidden process becomes impossible to ignore. As oxygen levels continued falling, daily life became increasingly difficult. Some crew members reported headaches. Others experienced fatigue that never seemed to disappear. Physical work became exhausting. Even ordinary activities required more effort than before. Yet the experiment continued. Abandoning the mission was considered unthinkable. Years of planning had led to this moment. Scientists hoped the atmosphere would eventually stabilize. Instead, another challenge emerged. The ecosystem was becoming biologically unbalanced. Certain species flourished beyond expectation. Others vanished completely. Ant populations exploded. Cockroaches multiplied rapidly. Meanwhile, many small vertebrates declined. Several species introduced to create ecological diversity disappeared from the structure altogether. The artificial world was evolving. But it was not evolving in the way scientists had predicted. Nature was rewriting the rules. One unexpected survivor was the ant. Without many natural predators, some ant species spread throughout the facility. They occupied agricultural areas. They entered living quarters. They appeared in places where researchers never expected to find them. The insects became a constant reminder that ecosystems cannot be controlled perfectly, no matter how carefully humans plan. Life follows its own path. At the same time, food shortages worsened. The crew had become highly efficient farmers. They worked tirelessly, yet calorie production remained lower than expected. People continued losing weight. Some participants eventually lost more than 15% of their body mass. The psychological effects became increasingly noticeable. Hunger changes behavior. It changes priorities. It changes the way people think. Meals became central events. Food discussions became common. Every harvest carried emotional significance. A successful crop brought relief. A disappointing crop brought anxiety. Outside Biosphere 2, public fascination continued growing. Millions of people followed updates. Journalists described the project as humanity's rehearsal for life on another planet. Supporters viewed it as a historic breakthrough. Critics saw it differently. Some argued the project was more spectacle than science. Others questioned whether the experiment could truly represent conditions on Mars. As debate intensified, pressure on the crew increased. They knew the world was watching. Every success attracted headlines. Every problem attracted even more. Inside the structure, isolation added another layer of difficulty. The crew had been living together for months. There was no escape from one another. No opportunity to leave for a few hours and clear their minds. Every disagreement remained present. Every personality conflict lingered. Small tensions slowly accumulated. At first, differences of opinion seemed manageable. Discussions focused on scientific priority, agricultural strategies, daily responsibilities. But over time, disagreements became more personal. The stress of constant work, hunger, and isolation amplified every conflict. Groups began forming. Friendships strengthened. Other relationships weakened. Communication became more difficult. Some crew members stopped speaking regularly with certain colleagues. The social dynamics of Biosphere 2 had become another experiment. Researchers had spent years studying ecosystems. Now they were witnessing the complexity of human behavior under extreme conditions. The structure itself seemed peaceful. Sunlight streamed through glass panels. Plants swayed gently. Artificial ecosystems appeared calm. Yet beneath that calm surface, enormous pressure was building. Then came a moment that forced everyone to confront reality. The oxygen concentration had fallen to levels comparable to some of the highest mountain elevations on Earth. The numbers alarmed medical experts. Cognitive performance could be affected. Physical health could deteriorate. Long-term risks were becoming impossible to ignore. The dream of a perfectly self-sustaining world was slipping away. For the first time, scientists faced a painful question. What if Biosphere 2 could not support human life on its own? The answer carried consequences far beyond the Arizona desert. Because if creating a miniature Earth was this difficult, establishing a colony on Mars might be far harder than anyone imagined. The experiment had begun as a demonstration of human ingenuity. Now it was becoming a lesson in humility. Every new discovery revealed another layer of complexity. Every solution uncovered new problems. And despite years of preparation, one unavoidable truth was becoming clear. Humanity still understood only a fraction of the systems that keep Earth alive every day. The greatest ecological experiment in history was exposing the extraordinary complexity of the planet we call home, and the most controversial decision of the entire project was about to arrive. The situation had reached a critical point. For more than a year, the inhabitants of Biosphere 2 had lived inside their artificial world. They had adapted to constant work. They had adapted to hunger. They had adapted to isolation. But adapting to a lack of oxygen was another matter entirely. Medical data continued to raise concerns. The atmosphere inside the structure no longer resembled the environment the project had been designed to maintain. Every week brought new measurements. Every new measurement brought the same conclusion. The oxygen level was still falling. Outside experts debated what should happen next. Some believed the experiment must remain untouched. After all, the purpose of the project was to determine whether a closed ecosystem could sustain human life. Intervening would compromise the results. Others disagreed. Human lives were involved. If conditions became dangerous, action would be necessary. The debate grew increasingly intense. Scientists argued, journalists speculated, supporters defended the project, critics attacked it. Meanwhile, inside Biosphere 2, daily life continued. The crew still cared for crops. They still collected data. They still maintained the ecosystems. Every morning they woke up and carried on. Yet many knew something had changed. The atmosphere inside the facility felt different. Even simple physical tasks could leave people exhausted. Some crew members found themselves moving more slowly. Others noticed difficulty concentrating for long periods. The effects were subtle but persistent. Eventually, a decision was made. Additional oxygen would be introduced into the structure. The announcement triggered immediate controversy. To some observers, it felt like an admission of failure. The ecosystem had not maintained itself. Human intervention had become necessary. Critics argued that the experiment's central goal had been compromised. Supporters countered that scientific experiments often require adjustments. The purpose was to learn, and Biosphere 2 was teaching valuable lessons every day. Regardless of the debate, one fact was undeniable. The oxygen crisis revealed how difficult it was to replicate Earth. The planet performs countless functions simultaneously. Forests regulate atmospheric gases. Oceans absorb carbon dioxide. Microorganisms recycle nutrients. Weather systems distribute heat and moisture. Every component influences every other component. Humans often take these processes for granted because they happen continuously. Only when scientists attempted to recreate them did they realize how extraordinary they truly are. As the oxygen issue stabilized, attention shifted toward another challenge. The ecosystems inside Biosphere 2 were changing in unexpected ways. The rainforest grew rapidly. Some trees reached heights beyond initial projection. Certain plants thrived under the warm, controlled conditions, but not all growth was beneficial. Researchers noticed that some trees were becoming unusually weak. They grew taller. They appeared healthy, yet many lacked structural strength. The reason was fascinating. Inside Biosphere 2, there were no strong winds. Outside in nature, wind acts as a constant force. Trees respond by developing stronger wood. They build internal support structures capable of resisting storms. Without wind, many trees inside the facility never developed that strength. As they grew larger, some began collapsing under their own weight. The discovery surprised researchers. Something as ordinary as wind had turned out to be essential for healthy forest development. It was another reminder that nature depends on countless interconnected factors. Remove one seemingly minor element, and unexpected consequences emerge. Throughout the facility, similar patterns appeared. Small changes produced large effects. Simple assumptions proved incorrect. The artificial ocean presented its own challenges. Scientists had hoped to maintain a thriving coral reef. Initially, conditions appeared favorable, but fluctuations in carbon dioxide levels affected water chemistry. The reef struggled. Some coral species showed signs of stress. Maintaining a miniature ocean turned out to be just as complicated as maintaining a miniature atmosphere. Every ecosystem required constant observation. Every ecosystem revealed new surprises. Outside the facility, public interest remained enormous. Visitors traveled from around the world to see Biosphere 2. Television documentaries explored the experiment. Newspapers published regular updates. For many people, the project represented humanity's future. For others, it represented humanity's arrogance. Could people really believe they could recreate an entire planet? The debate became almost philosophical. What exactly had Biosphere 2 accomplished? If the goal was to create a perfect, self-sustaining ecosystem, the answer seemed disappointing. The system had required intervention. Unexpected problems had emerged repeatedly. The experiment was far from perfect. Yet many scientists argued that perfection had never been the true achievement. The real achievement was knowledge. Before Biosphere 2, many ecological interactions were poorly understood. After Biosphere 2, researchers possessed enormous amounts of new data. They had observed how closed ecosystems behave. They had identified hidden processes affecting atmospheric chemistry. They had learned about species interaction under controlled conditions. Most importantly, they had gained a deeper appreciation for Earth's complexity. As the second year progressed, the crew reflected on their unusual lives. They had entered the structure, believing they understood nature. Now many realized how much remained unknown. Living inside Biosphere 2 changed the way people viewed the world. Every breath became meaningful. Every plant mattered. Every drop of water had value. Resources were no longer abstract concepts. They were the foundation of survival. Outside the structure, most people never think about where oxygen comes from. Few consider the microorganisms beneath their feet. Almost nobody notices the countless interactions occurring in forests, rivers, oceans, and soil. Inside Biosphere 2, those interactions became impossible to ignore. The experiment transformed ecological theory into daily reality. Months later, the mission finally approached its conclusion. The inhabitants had spent nearly 2 years inside their artificial world. They had experienced triumphs and failures. They had endured uncertainty, hunger, and controversy. They had participated in one of the most ambitious scientific projects ever attempted. Soon the doors would open once again. But when they stepped outside, they would carry something far more valuable than scientific measurements. They would carry a new understanding of Earth itself. Because after spending years trying to build a second planet, they had discovered something remarkable. The first one was far more extraordinary than anyone had ever imagined. The day the doors finally opened felt almost unreal. For nearly 2 years, the inhabitants of Biosphere 2 had lived inside a world separated from the rest of humanity. Their lives had been measured in harvests, oxygen levels, and ecological data. The glass walls had become their horizon. The artificial ecosystems had become their universe. Now, for the first time in hundreds of days, they would step outside. As the seals were released and fresh desert air entered the structure, emotions ran high. Some crew members smiled. Others appeared overwhelmed. A few struggled to describe what they were feeling. The outside world seemed strangely different. The sky looked larger. The landscape felt more open. Even ordinary sounds appeared unfamiliar. After living within a carefully controlled environment, the natural world felt almost overwhelming. Journalists immediately focused on a simple question. Had the experiment succeeded? The answer depended entirely on who was asked. Critics pointed to the oxygen crisis. They highlighted food shortages. They emphasized the need for outside intervention. From their perspective, the experiment had failed to prove that a completely closed ecosystem could sustain human life indefinitely. Supporters viewed the situation differently. They argued that the experiment had generated an unprecedented amount of scientific knowledge. No previous project had attempted anything so ambitious. No previous project had produced such detailed information about large-scale ecological interactions. Both sides had valid points, but over time, scientists began reaching a broader conclusion. Biosphere 2 had succeeded in a way nobody expected. Its greatest achievement was revealing how little humanity understood about Earth's systems. The project exposed assumptions that had gone unquestioned for decades. Many researchers had believed ecosystems could be predicted with reasonable accuracy. Biosphere 2 demonstrated that reality was far more complicated. Tiny variables could produce enormous consequences. Minor chemical reactions could alter atmospheric conditions. Microscopic organisms could influence the survival of entire ecosystems. The experiment became a lesson in humility. Humanity had attempted to build a miniature planet. Instead, it discovered how extraordinary the original planet truly was. Years after the mission ended, scientists continued analyzing the data. Research papers examined every aspect of the experiment: atmospheric chemistry, agriculture, ecology, human psychology, resource management. The information collected inside Biosphere 2 continued influencing scientific research long after the crew departed. Perhaps the most important impact involved space exploration. For decades, engineers had dreamed of sending humans to Mars. The vision seemed straightforward: build habitats, grow food, recycle air and water, create a self-sustaining colony. Biosphere 2 demonstrated that achieving those goals would be far more difficult than expected. If maintaining a closed ecosystem on Earth was so challenging, maintaining one on another planet could be vastly more complex. Future missions would need to account for countless factors. Every biological process mattered. Every chemical interaction mattered. Nothing could be taken for granted. As interest in Mars exploration increased during the following decades, many researchers revisited Biosphere 2. Its lessons remained relevant. In some ways, the project had been ahead of its time. Today, scientists developing advanced life support systems still study the experiment. Modern technologies have improved dramatically. Computers are more powerful. Sensors are more accurate. Environmental controls are more sophisticated. Yet the central challenge remains unchanged. How do you create a world capable of sustaining human life? The answer is still not fully understood. Meanwhile, Biosphere 2 itself continued evolving. The facility remained active as a research center. New scientific teams conducted experiments. Students visited to learn about ecology and environmental science. Researchers explored questions involving climate change, atmospheric processes, and ecosystem dynamics. The structure that once symbolized humanity's dream of building a second Earth became a tool for understanding the first one. Perhaps that was always its greatest purpose, because the more scientists studied Biosphere 2, the more they appreciated the incredible complexity of our own planet. Consider the air you are breathing right now. Its oxygen exists because countless organisms have shaped Earth's atmosphere over billions of years. Forests contribute. Oceans contribute. Microscopic algae contribute. Every breath is connected to an ancient global system operating on a scale almost impossible to comprehend. Consider water. It falls as rain, flows through rivers, moves into oceans, evaporates into clouds, returns again. The cycle never truly stops. Earth continuously recycles its resources through processes refined over immense spans of time. Humans often imagine technology as something separate from nature. Biosphere 2 suggested a different perspective. Perhaps the most advanced system ever created is the planet itself. No machine built by humans approaches its complexity. No laboratory matches its scale. No engineered environment reproduces its stability. Earth is not simply a place where life exists. Earth is a living system that makes life possible. That realization became one of the experiment's most powerful legacies. Years later, many participants reflected on what they had learned. Some spoke about ecology, others discussed psychology, many emphasized gratitude. Living inside a sealed world changed their perspective. For the first time, they truly understood how dependent humans are on natural systems. Every meal, every breath, every drop of water, nothing exists in isolation. Everything is connected. The lesson extended beyond science. It became a lesson about responsibility. If humanity hopes to explore other worlds, it must first understand its own. If humanity hopes to build sustainable environments elsewhere, it must learn how to protect the environment it already has. Because after spending years attempting to create a second Earth. Researchers reached a remarkable conclusion. The greatest scientific wonder was never inside the glass walls of Biosphere 2. It had been surrounding them all along. The forests, the oceans, the atmosphere, the living planet beneath their feet, Earth itself, a world so complex, so interconnected, and so extraordinary that even after decades of research, humanity is still discovering how it truly works. And perhaps that is the most fascinating scientific mystery of all. After the official conclusion of the experiment, Biosphere 2 did not disappear into history. Instead, it slowly transformed into something else entirely. What had once been a sealed world designed to isolate humans from Earth became a place where Earth itself could be studied more deeply. Scientists returned to the structure, not to repeat the experiment, but to understand it, to analyze what had gone wrong, and more importantly, what had gone right. One of the first major research efforts focused again on the oxygen mystery. Even years later, the data was re-examined with improved models. Researchers confirmed what had been suspected during the mission. The system had not failed because of a single error. It had failed because of complexity. Too many interacting processes had been underestimated. Soil chemistry, microbial respiration, plant growth cycles, carbon dioxide absorption. Each process was correct on its own, but together they created outcomes nobody had predicted. This realization changed ecological science. For decades, scientists had tried to simplify ecosystems into manageable models. Biosphere 2 showed that simplification can miss critical interaction. Nature does not behave like a controlled laboratory equation. It behaves like a layered network of dependencies. Remove or alter one layer, and the entire system adjusts in unexpected ways. Another long-term research focus was agriculture. Inside Biosphere 2, farming had been far more difficult than anticipated. Despite careful planning, yields were lower than expected. This led researchers to study a key insight. Agriculture inside a closed system is not just about planting crops. It is about maintaining balance. Soil nutrients must be continuously recycled. Microorganisms must remain stable. Pollination must be guaranteed. Even pest populations must be controlled without external intervention. Outside Earth, none of these systems can be taken for granted. Modern agricultural research now uses insights from Biosphere 2 to design more resilient closed-loop food systems. Some of these systems are being tested for use in space missions. Others are being used to improve sustainability on Earth. Another surprising outcome came from studying human behavior inside isolation. The psychological effects of Biosphere 2 were profound. Crew members experienced stress, conflict, and emotional strain, but they also experienced adaptation, cooperation, and resilience. Researchers studying the mission identified several key patterns. Isolation amplifies small conflicts. Resource scarcity changes social dynamics. Constant proximity reduces privacy and increases tension, but shared purpose can also strengthen group cohesion. These findings are now used in preparing astronauts for long-duration missions, especially missions to Mars, where communication delays with Earth could last minutes or even hours. Perhaps one of the most important lessons was about perception. Before Biosphere 2, many people believed ecosystems were somewhat predictable. If you knew enough variables, you could control outcomes. After Biosphere 2, that belief weakened. Scientists began accepting a different idea. Ecosystems are not fully controllable systems. They are adaptive systems. They respond. They evolve. They shift continuously. This shift in thinking influenced climate science as well. Earth's climate is not a simple machine. It is a dynamic system with feedback loops, delays, and nonlinear behavior. Small changes in one area can lead to large effects elsewhere. The Biosphere 2 experiment became a powerful metaphor for this reality. Even beyond science, the project left a cultural impact. It challenged how people think about technology and nature. Many had believed that with enough engineering, humans could recreate any environment. Biosphere 2 showed that replication is not the same as understanding. You can copy structure, but you cannot easily copy balance. Over time, public perception of the experiment softened. What was once criticized as a failure began to be seen as a bold step forward, not because it succeeded in its original goal, but because it revealed truths that could not have been learned any other way. In modern times, as humanity once again looks towards space exploration, Biosphere 2 has regained attention. Mars missions are no longer science fiction. Plans for human settlement are actively being developed. Closed-loop life support systems are being engineered with increasing precision. And still, the same questions remain. Can humans live in a completely artificial ecosystem for long periods? Can life support systems remain stable without external intervention? Can a miniature world truly function like Earth? Every new study, every new simulation, every new experiment eventually circles back to the lessons learned in Arizona decades ago. Because Biosphere 2 was never just about one experiment. It was about the limits of human understanding, and those limits are still being explored today. When you stand in front of the glass structure now, it no longer feels like a failed attempt to build a second Earth. It feels like a reminder that the real Earth is far more complex than anything humans have yet created. A reminder that life depends on systems we still do not fully understand, and a reminder that the greatest scientific discoveries often come not from success, but from failure. Because sometimes building a world is not the point. Sometimes the point is realizing how incredible the world already is. Years later, the legacy of Biosphere 2 continued to evolve in unexpected directions. What had once been a bold and controversial experiment gradually became a cornerstone of modern ecological research. But perhaps the most interesting development was not scientific at all. It was philosophical. Because Biosphere 2 forced people to confront a question that science alone could not fully answer. What does it truly mean for a system to sustain life? Before the experiment, many assumed the answer was purely technical. If you can balance oxygen and carbon dioxide, if you can grow enough food, if you can recycle water, then life can continue. But Biosphere 2 revealed something deeper. Technical balance is not enough. Systems are not static equations. They are living processes. They shift constantly. They react to stress. They evolve under pressure. And sometimes, they fail in ways that cannot be predicted in advance. This realization influenced not only science, but also how engineers think about design. Modern life support systems for space missions now include far more redundancy than originally planned. Sensors are more advanced. Feedback systems are more adaptive. But even with all improvements, engineers still accept uncertainty. Because Biosphere 2 demonstrated that uncertainty is not an error in understanding. It is part of reality itself. Inside the scientific community, the experiment is now often discussed alongside other major historical studies, not because it achieved perfect results, but because it revealed hidden truths. In ecology textbooks, Biosphere 2 is frequently referenced as a turning point, a moment when simplified models of ecosystems were replaced by more complex and realistic ones. Students learning about environmental science often encounter the experiment early in their education. They study the oxygen decline. They study the agricultural challenges. They study the ecosystem imbalance. But what is often emphasized most is the lesson behind the data. Earth cannot be easily replicated. Even the smallest biological or chemical process may have far-reaching consequences. At the same time, Biosphere 2 also influenced public understanding of sustainability. Before the experiment, sustainability was often discussed in abstract terms. Afterward, it became more tangible. People began to understand that resources are not infinite, that ecosystems are fragile, and that human activity is deeply connected to environmental stability. In some ways, Biosphere 2 anticipated modern concerns about climate change. The idea that small changes in atmospheric composition can have large-scale effects was no longer theoretical. It had been observed firsthand inside a sealed structure. Meanwhile, the facility itself continued to evolve physically. New research teams entered and left. Different experiments were conducted. Some focused on rainforest dynamics. Others explored desert ecology. Others studied atmospheric processes under controlled conditions. Each study built upon the foundation of the original experiment. The structure became a living laboratory, a place where Earth systems could be observed in miniature. Visitors often describe the experience as unusual. Standing inside the glass structures, you can see multiple ecosystems at once. A desert beside a rainforest, a marsh beside an ocean, each environment separated yet connected. It is a visual reminder of how interconnected Earth truly is. Even the design of Biosphere 2 reflects a deeper truth. Boundaries in nature are rarely absolute. Forests blend into savannas, oceans meet shorelines, atmospheric systems flow continuously across regions. Everything is connected by invisible processes. That is why the experiment was so difficult. It attempted to impose clear boundaries on systems that do not naturally have them. As time passed, the scientific community became more comfortable with this complexity. Instead of trying to simplify ecosystem, researchers began embracing their unpredictability. Modern ecological models now incorporate randomness, feedback loops, and nonlinear interactions. These tools did not exist in the same form before Biosphere 2. In this sense, the experiment pushed science forward not by succeeding, but by challenging assumptions. Even today, when new environmental technologies are developed, they are often tested with the lessons of Biosphere 2 in mind. Closed-loop farming systems, urban sustainability models, space habitat design, all of them carry echoes of that early attempt to build a second Earth. But perhaps the most lasting impact is emotional, rather than technical. People who study Biosphere 2 often describe a shift in perspective, a deeper appreciation for the planet we already inhabit. Because when you attempt to recreate Earth and fail, you begin to understand how extraordinary Earth truly is. It is not just a place where life exists. It is a system that actively maintains life, a self-regulating network billions of years in the making. Every forest, every ocean current, every microorganism, every chemical cycle, all working together in ways that science is still uncovering. Biosphere 2 did not replace Earth. It revealed Earth, and that may be its greatest achievement. Not creating a new world, but helping humanity finally see the one it already has. The story, however, is not finished, because as long as humans continue to explore space, design ecosystems, and attempt to understand life itself, the lessons of Biosphere 2 will remain relevant. Every future attempt to build a habitat beyond Earth will carry its shadow, a reminder that even the smallest system can hold overwhelming complexity, and that the boundary between success and failure in science is often not a line, but a spectrum of discovery. As research into Biosphere 2 continued, new generations of scientists began to ask different questions. The original experiment had focused on survival. Could humans live inside a sealed system? Could an artificial ecosystem sustain life without external input? But later studies shifted toward something more subtle. Not just survival, but stability. Not just whether life could persist, but how long it could remain balanced. This change in perspective opened new areas of research. Scientists began studying micro-interactions within ecosystems at unprecedented detail. They examined how small organisms influence large-scale atmospheric changes. They studied how soil chemistry affects plant growth over time. They analyzed how even minor variations in humidity or temperature could cascade into larger environmental effects. Biosphere 2 became a reference point for understanding complexity itself. One of the most important realizations was that ecosystems are not designed systems. They are emergent systems. No single organism controls them. No central authority manages them. Instead, they arise from countless interactions happening simultaneously. This idea had always been known in theory, but Biosphere 2 made it visible. Inside the structure, researchers could observe what happens when those interactions are slightly altered. For example, the absence of natural wind patterns affected plant development. Without constant mechanical stress, trees grew differently. Some became structurally weaker, despite appearing healthier. This discovery influenced modern forestry research. It demonstrated that physical forces, even when subtle, play a crucial role In biological development, another area of study focused on nutrient cycles. In natural ecosystems, nutrients are constantly recycled. When organisms die, they decompose and return nutrients to the soil. In Biosphere 2, this process occurred, but not always as expected. The rate of decomposition varied. Microbial populations shifted. Chemical balances changed in unpredictable ways. These variations affected plant growth and ecosystem stability. Over time, researchers began to understand that even small inefficiencies in recycling processes could have large long-term consequences. This insight has since been applied to sustainable agriculture projects around the world. It has also influenced the design of closed-loop systems for space exploration. NASA and other space agencies now use models inspired by Biosphere 2 to design life support systems for long-duration missions. These systems aim to recycle air, water, and nutrients as efficiently as possible. But even with advanced technology, the challenge remains enormous. Because the fundamental problem is not engineering alone, it is understanding complexity. Back on Earth, Biosphere 2 itself became a symbol of that complexity. Visitors often describe a strange feeling when walking through the facility. It is not just a scientific site. It feels like a living question. Each ecosystem inside the structure raises new uncertainties. How stable is this rainforest? How long can this soil sustain crops? How do these systems interact over time? The structure does not provide simple answers. Instead, it highlights how many questions still remain. For the original crew members, the experience continued to shape their lives long after the experiment ended. Many reported a lasting change in perspective. They spoke about heightened awareness of environmental systems. They described a deeper respect for natural processes. Some said they could no longer look at ordinary landscapes without thinking about hidden connections. A forest was no longer just trees. It was a network of relationships, a cycle of energy and nutrients, a fragile balance maintained over time. The ocean was no longer just water. It was a system regulating climate, absorbing carbon, and supporting life on a planetary scale. Even the air became something more meaningful, a constantly changing mixture, shaped by countless living processes. This shift in perception is perhaps one of the most powerful outcomes of Biosphere 2. It changed not only what scientists know, but how they see. In modern discussions about environmental science, Biosphere 2 is often used as a cautionary example, not of failure, but of limitation. A reminder that even well-designed systems can behave in unexpected ways. A reminder that prediction has boundaries. And a reminder that nature is not simply something to be engineered. It is something to be understood. As decades passed, the experiment's reputation stabilized. It was no longer viewed as a controversial attempt that fell short. Instead, it was recognized as a pioneering step in ecological research. Its data continues to be analyzed. Its lessons continue to be applied. Its influence continues to grow. Even in education, Biosphere 2 is used as a teaching tool. Students learn not only about ecosystems, but about scientific uncertainty. They learn that discovery often comes from unexpected results. They learn that failure can be a source of knowledge. And they learn that complex systems rarely behave according to simple predictions. Perhaps the most important lesson is this: understanding Earth requires more than observation. It requires humility, because Earth is not just complex. It is profoundly, unimaginably complex. And every attempt to replicate it reveals new layers of depth. Biosphere 2 did not give humanity a second Earth. Instead, it gave humanity a clearer view of the first one. And that insight continues to shape science, engineering, and environmental thinking to this day. As Biosphere 2 entered the later stages of its scientific legacy, researchers began to focus less on the structure itself and more on what it represented. It had become more than an experiment. It had become a reference point for understanding the limits of human control over natural systems. One of the most significant shifts in thinking came from climate science. Before experiments like Biosphere 2, climate systems were often modeled using relatively simplified assumptions. Scientists treated variables such as temperature, humidity, and carbon cycles as somewhat predictable when averaged over time. But Biosphere 2 demonstrated that even in a small, controlled environment, interactions between these variables could produce unexpected outcomes. This realization had profound implications. If complexity behaved unpredictably in a sealed structure on Earth, then global climate systems would be even more intricate. The atmosphere of Earth is not a single uniform system. It is a constantly shifting combination of regional and global processes. Ocean currents interact with air circulation. Forests interact with atmospheric chemistry. Ice sheets influence global energy balance. And all of these systems influence one another simultaneously. Biosphere 2 provided a miniature demonstration of how fragile equilibrium can be. Even small disturbances in oxygen balance, carbon dioxide levels, or biological activity created cascading effects inside the structure. This helped scientists refine climate models to include feedback loops and nonlinear responses. Another major development came in the field of systems engineering. Engineers began to adopt ideas from ecological science. Instead of designing systems that rely on perfect conditions, they began designing systems that could tolerate instability. Redundancy became a key principle. Flexibility became essential. Adaptation became more important than precision. This shift is now visible in many modern technologies, from spacecraft life support systems to sustainable urban infrastructure. The influence of Biosphere 2 can still be traced. It encouraged engineers to accept that no system can be perfectly controlled. Instead, systems must be resilient. They must recover from failure. They must adapt to changing conditions. Meanwhile, environmental scientists continue to study the original data collected during the experiment. Decades after the doors of Biosphere 2 reopened, new analyses still produced insights. Some of these insights were subtle, others were surprising. For example, researchers discovered that small variations in soil composition had disproportionately large effects on plant productivity. This finding reinforced the idea that ecosystems are highly sensitive to initial conditions, a concept that is now central to modern ecological theory. Another area of ongoing research involves microbial life. The billions of microorganisms inside Biosphere 2 played a critical role in oxygen consumption and nutrient cycling. At the time of the experiment, these processes were only partially understood. Today, with advanced genetic and biochemical tools, scientists are able to revisit those microbial interactions in far greater detail. They are discovering just how complex and interconnected those systems truly were. Each gram of soil contained thousands of interacting species. Each species contributed to chemical processes that affected the entire ecosystem. This level of complexity explains why predictions were so difficult. No model at the time could fully account for such dense networks of interaction. As scientific tools improved, Biosphere 2 became a time capsule of ecological complexity, a preserved case study of what happens when an entire world is placed inside a controlled environment. Beyond science, the cultural impact of Biosphere 2 also continued to grow. It became a symbol used in discussions about sustainability. Writers, educators, and environmental advocates often reference it when explaining the importance of ecological balance. The experiment is frequently used to illustrate a simple idea. Human civilization depends on systems it does not fully control or understand. This message has become increasingly relevant in the modern era. As global populations grow and environmental pressures increase, understanding ecological interdependence is more important than ever. Biosphere 2 serves as a reminder that even well-intentioned interventions can have unintended consequences. It encourages caution in large-scale environmental engineering projects. It also encourages respect for natural systems that have evolved over billions of years. In many ways, the experiment shifted the narrative around human-environment interaction. Instead of viewing nature as something to be mastered. It is now more often viewed as something to be worked with, a partner system rather than a controllable machine. As the scientific community reflects on decades of research, Biosphere 2 continues to occupy a unique position. It is neither a failure nor a complete success. It is a source of insight, a demonstration of both human ambition and human limitation. Perhaps its most enduring contribution is not the data it produced, but the questions it raised. Can we ever fully understand complex living systems? Can we replicate planetary conditions artificially? And should we attempt to do so at all? These questions remain open, and they continue to influence research across disciplines, from ecology to engineering, from climate science to space exploration. Biosphere 2 remains relevant, not because it answered every question, but because it revealed how many questions still exist. In the final reflection of Biosphere 2, one idea becomes unavoidable. The experiment was never truly about building a second Earth. It was about understanding the first one. Every failure inside the structure pointed back to a success outside it. Every imbalance inside the glass walls highlighted a hidden balance in the natural world. Every shortage, every fluctuation, every unexpected outcome revealed something essential about life on a planetary scale. As the data accumulated over years of research, scientists began to see Earth not as a background for life, but as an active participant in it. A system that constantly regulates itself through feedback, adaptation, and interaction. Not a passive environment, but a dynamic living process. This perspective shift may be Biosphere 2's most important legacy, because it changed the way humans think about environment itself. Instead of seeing environment as something external, it became understood as something deeply integrated with life. Life does not simply exist on Earth. Life and Earth are intertwined processes, each shaping the other continuously. Inside Biosphere 2, that truth became visible in a way it had never been before. There was no separation between biological systems and physical systems. Air, water, soil, and organisms were all part of one continuous network. When one part changed, everything changed. This realization is now central to modern environmental science. It is also central to climate policy, conservation efforts, and sustainability design. The world today faces challenges that require exactly this kind of thinking. Climate change, resource depletion, ecosystem loss, urban expansion. Each of these issues involves interconnected systems that cannot be solved in isolation. The lessons of Biosphere 2 continue to inform how scientists, engineers, and policymakers approach these problems. But beyond policy and science, the experiment also left something more personal, a shift in perception. People who study Biosphere 2 often describe a lasting awareness of fragility, not fragility in a negative sense, but in a realistic sense. A recognition that stability is not guaranteed. It is maintained continuously through countless interactions that remain mostly invisible. Every breath depends on those interactions. Every meal depends on them. Every moment of human life is supported by systems far larger than individual understanding. This awareness changes how people view the natural world. Forests are no longer just scenery. They are active systems regulating atmospheric chemistry. Oceans are not just vast bodies of water. They are essential components of global climate stability. Soil is not just ground. It is a living matrix of organisms and processes. Even something as simple as rainfall becomes part of a larger cycle connecting atmosphere, land, and life. Biosphere 2 helped make these connections visible in a controlled environment, but the real system it pointed to was always Earth itself. Over time, the structure itself became less of a headline and more of a tool. Researchers continued using it to test ecological theories. Students used it to learn about environmental science. Visitors used it to gain a deeper appreciation for planetary systems. The glass walls that once symbolized isolation came to represent connection instead, a reminder that Earth is also a closed system, just on a much larger and more complex scale. No external supply exists for planetary life. Everything is recycled. Everything is connected. Everything depends on everything else. And that realization leads to a final, unavoidable conclusion. If humanity ever hopes to expand beyond Earth, it must first fully understand how Earth itself works. Because Biosphere 2 demonstrated that creating a self-sustaining world is not simply a technological challenge, it is a knowledge challenge. And that knowledge is still incomplete, even today. Scientists continue discovering new aspects of ecological systems, new microbial interactions, new climate feedback loops, new biological dependencies. Each discovery reinforces the same idea. The Earth is not fully understood, and perhaps it never will be in a complete sense, but that does not diminish the value of trying. Biosphere 2 stands as proof that even imperfect attempts can produce profound insight. It showed that failure in science is not an endpoint. It is a form of exploration, a way of revealing hidden structures that success alone might never expose. In the end, the experiment did not create a second Earth. Instead, it created a deeper understanding of the only one we have, a clearer awareness of how life, atmosphere, and environment are inseparably linked, and a lasting reminder that the most complex system we will ever encounter is the planet we already call home. The story of Biosphere 2 is not a story of building a world. It is a story of discovering the limits of building worlds. And in that discovery, humanity gained something far more valuable than a controlled ecosystem. It gained perspective, a perspective that continues to shape science, technology, and environmental thinking to this day. And as long as humans continue to ask how life works, how ecosystems function, and how planets sustain life, the lessons of this experiment will remain relevant, because Biosphere 2 was never just about a sealed structure in the Arizona desert. It was about understanding the only true biosphere that has ever mattered, the Earth itself.